And if even if Field Mouse and Fanta were like, yeah, this is cool, but like, nah, dog, I was like, I'm ready to do this myself, and I have no problem with that because I got to a place where I'm like, this book is something I really care about. I think it's awesome. I'm so excited to put this together, and well, cherry on top is somebody else put it together, which
Hey, thanks for listening. Last week's query letter debacle is resolved. The nearly finished letter is past the sniff test and will now live with my notes and previous manuscript outputs for Blackfire. A friend of mine asked me the other day, like, are you sad about this? And I wouldn't classify it as sad because I've started a new book, which is great. Like, I'm super excited to be back into this story. It has been a long, long time coming. Everything is just clicking into place, which really feels great. I was said to someone this morning, the excitement of starting a new writing project is like the equivalent of starting a new art project where you get to go buy art supplies, but in this case, you get to build spreadsheets and scribble with a red pen on printouts. So I guess that's the writer's equivalent of that. Although I really, really want to get a new fountain pen. I deserve that, right? Right. One thing I've done going back decades, I've given my design projects code names to protect the client's intelligence property, just in case. So moving forward, when I referred to Project Hammer Echo or Hammer Echo, that's what I'm talking about. That's the new book. It has nothing to do with the book, but it fits. Keep an eye out for a newsletter update soon, which I'll kind of go into a little more detail about a few things. And as I was putting this together, I think I've cracked the code on how I can do a daily update for the progress of the book, which is a really helpful thing for me and to make it public so the people who care can keep an eye on it. And that way I have to stay honest. So this week's guest is Beth Hetland, and Beth has a new graphic novel coming out called Tender from Fantagraphics. And she is an adjunct professor for art. And we had this great conversation about academia, about writing, about making comics, about following your path, about social pressure. Her book is this psychological thriller horror tale, which really leans heavy on social pressures. And it really, I read it and it is really good. Like, I totally dug it. It is painful and brutal, but in all the ways that are provocative in the terms to get you thinking and talking about stuff. So definitely check it out if you can. I think there's a link for the pre-orders in the description. And one more quickie. This was recorded through my earbuds, so it's not as, radio sounding as normal. So I apologize for the technical difficulties. Thanks. Buckle up. This is me and Beth Hetland. You've done a lot of books of your own, and and with your collaborator, how strategic are you, or are you still in sort of that art degree mindset or MFA mindset, or have you sort of like evolved beyond those two to say like, okay, here's how I need to approach what I want to do going forward?
I mean, I am very strategic about like where my time goes, I would say. And I think that
Right.
for me, because like many folks, I have my day job, which is teaching, and like ultimately that's what pays my bills right now. And so my like strategic choices have to do with how do I, or at least since I started teaching and started moving up kind of the adjunct ladder. So now, just for clarity's sake, I'm the highest adjunct I can be at my current institution at SAIC. So that means the only place I can go from here is either a different school or to get full time and begin the 10-year track.
Yeah.
So part of my whole goal is to, like, if I get tenure, then I get more job security and theoretically more pay, which means I need to kind of be thoughtful about the projects that I'm doing and how those reflect on like the expectations of my school in some way. I mean, of course there's like what I'm interested in, what I want to do, all of that. I love self-publishing. I love a physical object. I love being able to like make things. Um
Mm-hmm.
but one of the biggest criticisms I received as I've been going through these various promotion processes is, hey, you don't have a book with a publisher. And not for lack of offers, which I feel very privileged to have, but for lack of finding the right place for the right project and the right thing until now. So I'm hoping, going to continue to kind of pave that path of protecting my most precious commodity, which is my time. To be like, okay, well, more, less actual physical teaching and more kind of like security for that means that I can really dedicate a little bit more time to what kind of projects I want to pursue. So right now um I mean, and also just as self-publishing goes, like there's so much that I think feeds directly into my interest in like artist books and kind of the like printmaking aspect of things. So I don't know, the strategic choice. I would say, like, right now I'm not thinking, okay, here's my debut book. It comes out, March 12th, so we're getting close to the 1 month mark for when we're recording this. But I don't know what the next kind of step or move is necessarily strategic wise.
Right.
I know what projects I'm interested in doing, and I have like things that are in process or various things that I'm kind of noodling around, but I don't have, like, I'm not quite sure until this comes out and see kind of, what the reception is and kind of ride the wave of having a book with a publisher and see like what do I like, what do I not like about that.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're talking about like it's a very different world because you're in academia
Yeah.
and this because like I understand that world in a non in a non creative aspect. Like I know people in academia and like well they need to publish, like
Hmm.
they need to publish to sort of justify their position in the what where they're tracking, if especially if they're looking for tenure. And
Yeah.
then if you are tenured, you need to publish because you need to be an asset to the university.
Yeah.
And so all that, and it's so interesting because when you're talking, I'm like, oh, like it's as legitimate to publish a graphic novel
Hmm.
as it
Hmm.
is a paper on proteins and how they interact with the specific light spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that one of the things that is maybe, and I can only speak from the institution that I teach
Sure.
at, right, is like I have not worked at other art schools in a long-term
Right.
capacity. I've like taught at other art schools, but not for like years or semesters or things like that, like workshops I've done. But part of my contract and part of my deal with a teacher is I need to be an active participant in my own art practice, which is considered, is that gallery shows, is that performances, is that um, publishing, exactly. So that can be part of it, but it is very similar.
I think it's fantastic to think about it in those terms because I don't, because listen, I went to SVA,
Mm,
and even though they have an MFA program, I don't think the rigor in the terms of who the instructors are for that is the same as it would be for Yale.
yeah.
Like I
Right.
just think
Right.
that I think like there isn't a pressure probably on those instructors to publish or whatever the thing is. I mean,
Hmm.
like yes, they need to be active, gallery shows, et cetera, and so forth. I would assume, um, but we're I don't know. It's to me, to me this is a fascinating idea, like of thinking how. art, and especially in the terms of comic books, applies to that. And and just, I'm like, hey, I'm learning right now, so this is
Yeah.
good.
I mean, and also a lot of the, well, some of the classes that I teach are about professional development. And so a big facet of me being interested in working with a publisher or fielding offers or like kind of just collecting and like you said learning about all of this is that I want to share this with my students. When I was starting out, I had never seen a publishing contract. I had no idea what I should be looking for. I didn't know how to protect what I wanted to keep for myself. Like, did not know what work for hire was, did not, all of this stuff that I think is really necessary for somebody who wants a career or wants to have a path either in comics or illustration or animation, even. There's shared language in some of these areas, and it wasn't until I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies that some of that became clear of what was really needed and that understanding. And I feel like that you shouldn't have to get an MFA just to learn that. That should be something that, as like
Yeah,
mentorship, as colleagues, like this is how, like, so much of learning this is from my friends in comics and me being like, what do I do? Like, help me figure this out. And like I
yeah.
want to do that for my students. Is that it would be such a disservice, I think, to not, even if I find, like, even if a contract or an offer has been made to me that I know I'm not going to accept, and being transparent with that entity to say, can I still see your documents? Like, this is
Hmm.
educational for me, or this is part of what I'm interested in, and being clear about why I'm saying no, and also being able to like bring that back into the classroom and share that with my students is really, really valuable to me.
Well, I think that's, you're bringing up what I think is an important um, point of view, which artists have a very hard time on understanding, is that you don't have to say yes. It's like that school, like, well, the first person to ask me to the dance is the one I say yes to. It's like, it doesn't always have to be that way. Like, if
Right.
you really don't think this is a comfortable situation, say no.
Hmm.
And it's a business relationship. And just because someone is saying, hey, we want to do this with you, it may not be the right one for you. Even if they're the nicest people in the world, if it's a
Yeah.
great publisher, it just might not be the right place for the right thing for where you want to take your work.
But if you're new and you've only been to one dance and you've only been
Yep.
asked by one person, you don't know that. And I think that it can be very exciting. I think, like, I never want to do a disservice for how that feels to have that person
Sure.
be interested, but I also, like you said, like I want someone to be informed about when they're agreeing to bring a project to work with a different entity, or when you're bringing somebody else in. Like, that's a very big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And the publishing world is a tough world.
Hmm.
And outside listen, even with big publishers, it's business.
Yeah.
Their job is to make the most that they can, and give the least to do that. That's business. Like, it's just how it works. And it's not, and it's not personal, but you can't, it's real hard to not let yourself be put in a situation where you are taken advantage of, which
Right.
happens, and
Yeah.
it'll happen with everybody, most everybody's career at one point or the other. And
Yeah.
it sucks. And I think what's wonderful is that you're trying to advance the learning curve outside of the MFA world, which has always been the sort of the black arts. It's like, well, look at that person. And then the gallery shows and the fancy CV because they went to
Right.
MFA program. They have the secret handshake. They know what to do.
Yeah.
It's partially true, because their success is a success for the institution,
Hmm. Yeah.
much more so than the BFA.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's still secret handshake zone in an art school BFA, right? Like, but I think that movement, or I feel very connected to shared resources, shared transparency, collective understanding, collective learning. And like, as much as, yeah, being at an art school pays my bills, I also feel like it's important to recognize, like, if you're making comics, just make the comics. Like, you don't need anything else. And if you want that, excellent. That's the route that I took. But like, I just feel like that kind of thing is really important. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, you don't need someone's permission to make something.
yeah,
It's a pretty free and open road in that respect, which is tough
yeah,
because without boundaries and without sort of limitations, it can be a little overwhelming.
yeah,
So to be able to define these things for yourself does make it a little bit easier. Or if there's an external force saying, hey, we need this by this amount of time, you go, oh, okay, I got to get it done. So
hmm
these are the things that the benefits, money aside, the benefits are that there is a sort of an external force that is dictating your completion.
yeah, absolutely. Plus, like, we could go on and on about what the benefits that I see and the benefits that I feel about like community, about like the acceleration that education or like an institution gives you, like just time and space dedicated to growing your practice at a rate that's so much faster than typically when you're doing it by yourself. But like, that's just that's the way it is. But at the end of the day, it's helpful, but these are also tools versus like the hardest thing is just putting the butt in the chair, right? For anybody.
Sure. No, that's it. I mean, we finished up our writers group on Saturday, and there was one new person there who had never done writing, and he was, when he had this idea, and it's really fun, and we're like, oh my God, and everybody's just like super, active and fired up. And I said, okay, well, now's the time that we have to now be, you know, convert potential energy into kinetic energy.
Yep.
Like this isn't,
hmm
don't let this just fizzle into nothing. Go do something with it. And
Yeah.
because that's the problem. Like we talk about the things, and that is like a sort of a balm or a substitution for actually doing things for many people.
Yeah. And I think that, there's so much that, and I see this with folks who are in school and folks who are not in school, is that the difference is, did you do the thing that you like, did you make it? Or are you just talking about making it? And I think,
Right.
there are lots of reasons why somebody may or may not get an opportunity to, but like developing something can only go so far. Like you said, it has to be converted into kinetic energy. And if like you can't get feedback, you can't grow, you can't change, you can't excel until you've made a thing, like even if it's a bad thing or if it's like not very good or not your best, like,
Well,
and that's the
but it
way that you
has to be
learn.
bad.
Yeah, it
It
has to
has to
be.
be
It
bad.
has to be.
Like I think, we all want to do amazing, and I'm really only talking in the creative arts in this respect, but like we all want to make amazing and fantastic stuff.
hmm
Like we don't like, yeah, I mean, I just want to make some mediocre things. Like nobody says that. And you jump into this thing, but the hard part is that we already know what is great.
hmm
You know what's great. It's because it's what you love.
Yeah,
You love, oh, I love that band, or I love that book, or I love the whatever, that painting.
right.
But then we are judging our creativity against what we already consider greatness.
hmm
And we all know we're not there. Like,
Right.
yes, we could be brash and young and go, yeah, I'm the fucking best. But the thing is like you don't, you know deep in your heart, you're not there yet. So
Yeah.
that fear of putting that thing, it's like picking up an instrument and going, oh, I'd love to play this instrument, and then you make this horrible sound, and you go, well, maybe I don't want to play this instrument, because to get to that point where it doesn't sound horrible is a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that that's also what, stops people from drawing or pursuing, creative practices in a lot of different ways. That's Linda Berry's whole model, right? Is, anybody can do this, you just have to do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember, I don't know, like a while ago, somebody, I don't know, put a thing out there, like poor Neil Gaiman. I mean, not poor Neil Gaiman, but poor Neil Gaiman because everybody at messages Neil Gaiman on social media because he's a really good person and he seems to like engage.
Mhm.
And someone's like, oh, like a da 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 da. I've got this idea for a comic book. I just don't know what I can, what to do. And then Neil's response was like, well, it sounds like you probably should make friends with an artist, And then I'm like, and I said that, or just do it yourself
Yeah. Or start
because
drawing. Yeah.
right, or start drawing it because it doesn't matter. Like it's gonna like I mean, you have to be willing to be bad to become good.
Yeah.
Like that's all there is to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that though, don't you think that there is like there's some folks that just aren't willing to accept that or aren't willing to like
Oh, for sure.
suffer through the like, wow, this is bad.
Yeah, like I
Yeah.
mean, all the people who you went to art school with who didn't show up the next year,
Yeah.
all the
Mhm.
people you graduated from art school with who are working different jobs.
Mhm.
And it's not, and I'm not saying that it's like if you just do it, you'll be successful at it. That's not the case. I mean, obviously, we know
Yeah.
timing, luck, hard work, being in the right place, all those things do matter. The secret handshake. But like, there's a fear. Like I have a very close friend who was like the golden child, in
Mm.
art school when it came in his discipline, and he didn't do anything. And he
Mm.
he admitted to me years and years and years later. He's like, like I was just kind of scared.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
like that's as absolutely valid as anything else.
Absolutely. One of my one of the resources we have at the school is this like artist books collection, and they collect student work, of course. It's called the Joan Flash Artist Books Collection, but I take my students there. And one of my favorite visits, because they'll pull my stuff from when I was a student, or like some of the things from very very early in my career. And one of my students found one time and held it up in front of this entire class of people and went, look how bad you were.
Nice.
And I think about that all the time, and not in a way that like I want to rip that student. No, not at all. I just think it's so funny and like really powerful to be like, look, yes, that was me. Like I did that and it was bad. But now look where I'm at. But I wouldn't be here if I
Right.
didn't keep going, or
Totally.
find myself thinking this is great at the time.
Yeah, well, those people never get too far when they're really really happy with what they did. Like it just
There's
that's plateauing.
some amount of delusion you need though, right?
That's the only thing that keeps you going. You know,
Yeah.
it's like I think I always afforded myself maybe like 2 or 3 minutes of like satisfaction, and then I'm like, oh, that's horrible. It was always that.
Yeah.
It was the worst. So what are you teaching?
This semester I'm teaching a capstone, which is like a senior class. It's sort of like a thesis class for cartoonists. So they're working on like a single kind of like thesis based project for the whole semester, and we do some like professional development stuff so they get like a tabling experience. And then the that artist book collection will collect their final projects. I'm also teaching a professional practices class, which is like a junior level class. So that's the contracts, resumes, cover letters, invoices, how to network
Hmm.
stuff. And then I'm also doing some graduate advising with, I have predominantly writing students, and then I have one print media student this semester, but all of them are kind of, some are doing comics, some are doing prose, some are doing like sort of installation work, various different things. But that's really fun because it's very just like individual meetings, checking in on like projects with master's students, and just kind of having interesting conversations about what they want to do with their art practice. But that's what I'm teaching this semester. Hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you were these sort of slots or something that you had to develop a curriculum for?
For the junior and senior class, I developed the curriculum for both of those. Hmm.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a
I feel really excited about them. They're, again, these are the types of classes that I wish had existed when I was a student, and so that's a lot of how I approach like building classes and proposing classes, because SAIC in particular doesn't have like a comics or illustration department. It's like very interdisciplinary, so these classes are kind of seeded all across the institution, which is both a positive and a negative. I think the positive side for me is that I have a lot of opportunity, as well as other faculty, to like pitch and develop new things and different pockets. The negative is, of course, that there's some, like, it's hard to organize it. There's some overlap. There's not exactly the best like hierarchy with it, but yeah. So I'm really happy with those, and I feel really really lucky to be able to teach them. So.
That's really cool. I wonder, I have no idea what the curriculum is currently, at SVA, because I went there and studied, cartooning. I mean,
Mm,
I was only focused on becoming a comic book artist, I think it was all secret handshake. You know, I'm happen to be at an art school in New York City
mm-hmm.
with teachers who were teaching, who were professionals in the business, and it made it it made it easy to bridge the gap
Yeah.
in that sense. If you had an assistant editor come in and talk to the class, you can walk up and say, "Could I give you a call?"
Mm-hmm.
And that made that pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you do once you get in the door, that's all up to you.
Right.
All the glad handing's over.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that way about my time studying at the Center for Cartoon Studies. Is it felt like being in, or it still feels this way, is like being in that club, or being in with such proximity of like really incredible faculty, really incredible cartoonists, and then every week they have like a visiting artist, and so it would be very similar to that. And one of those weeks is specifically like an industry focused day, and so they would bring in editors and art directors, and although Vermont is not at all New York, it's a close enough train ride or flight to get some like pretty big name contacts,
Oh
and
yeah.
so that was really really nice.
Oh, that's yeah. No, I think it's I'm also just amazed at the proliferation
Mm,
of the medium in the sense, because traveling back in time to when I was in school, there were two choices.
mm,
That
yeah,
maybe a third-ish choice. SCAD was kind of a choice, but it really was SVA and the Kubert School.
right,
And then after that, it was and one was a college, and the other one was kind of a trade school, an
right.
accredited trade school to be to do that. And now to see so many programs across the country
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of it's such a testament to the form exceeding the the gutters of superhero comic books, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, I think. And there's still so much new, like new work that is really exciting and feels like it's redefining or finding new areas of the medium that haven't really been like poked and prodded at yet. And I think that that's really exciting to see. And that I don't know if that comes specifically from just like more people have access to publishing opportunities. I don't know if that comes from just like conventions and zine shows. I don't know if that comes from just like the fun DIY experimentation stuff, or if that's a testament to like the educational growth or, um, opportunities for that.
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. I
Yeah, it has
mean,
to be, right?
yeah, I mean, and you're looking at generations now growing up, seeing more and more in a breadth of stuff where I mean, and listen, I'll say the influx of manga on let's just say the American comic reading
Mm,
numbers. It's not that that specifically is like, oh, everyone's going to go do that. What it does is it says, oh, there's something completely different than what I've seen before, that
yeah,
might be X-Men or something like that, which
right.
is totally fine. But like when you say, oh, there's a completely different thing, what else is there?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when you can kind of discover and see all this creativity that isn't on the bookshelf of whatever place that you normally see it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also that expansion that specifically manga has of like comics for adults and like comics that are intended to grow with their audience versus the US market which so frequently only hyperfixates on that middle grade or YA section and like just because that's marketable or popular that they're I think we're hitting a place and have been for a bit of like those children are aging up and wondering what else they can read because
Yeah,
we just in the States it's just not enough, you know, it's not enough good quality and supported
right.
for adult content versus like manga specifically.
I totally agree, and it's something that's been plaguing me for I don't know 5-ish years, and this whole concept that it's sort of like soccer
Mm,
or bicycles, like soccer and bicycles. Like kids grow up and they play soccer and they ride bicycles around,
mm-hmm.
and then they get interested in you know extracurricular activities with other people and or driving, and those things disappear. And there's no question soccer is the biggest sport in the world. There's no sport that even comes close
Yeah,
in
right.
in scope. But in our country, we don't produce the level of soccer players that a second world nation in Africa, not knocking them, but they're producing better soccer players. Why? Because soccer is the big sport in their nation. So everybody wants to be a soccer player, but everyone here wants to be a football player, a basketball player, a baseball player, not a soccer player.
Mm.
And I think that that type of stuff makes it very hard to get further. And I'm going to tie this all together. Make sense.
I was like
But
we're really out of my depth when we're talking about soccer, but I'm hanging in there.
the whole middle grade YA graphic novel market, which is huge
Mhm.
and making amazing things, is the same thing as the soccer ball. So when they hit the age of 16 years old, well, all those books, there's nothing to follow it up with.
Yeah, yeah.
So they go, what? But I'm not a superhero person. I
Right.
like these kinds of stories. So
Yeah.
it goes away for them, and I don't know why the publishing houses don't realize that they can grow their audience rather than produce products which fall in the same realm as, and I'm going to date myself, as a VCR tape or a DVD
Mm.
to entertain your child for a period of time, so they're not causing problems.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think, I'm not sure. I'm curious to see how it all shakes out because so many, like all my nieces and like many of my friends' kids are learning to read exclusively on comics. And that's the only way that they're finding joy in reading is that, there are and like, the more awareness we have about like neurodivergence and about different learning styles and about all of these other things is like neurodivergence doesn't end when you hit 16. Like it's not
Done.
gone.
I'm done
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, all of a sudden you're like it's so easy, like it just doesn't happen. And I
Hand me
think
that biography on Lincoln.
yeah, and I think that like there's stuff that like that I think, even the prevalence of audiobooks, I think also like the different headway we're making on accessibility formats, but all of that is stuff that I think feeds into it. But I agree is that I really don't understand why there are not why the publishing industry, right? Like speaking in generalizations, is not picking up on the fact that like your readers will grow up and you could have things for them that they might like. Like I think a really good example though right now that's happening in real time is the Tamaki cousins, right? Their new book Roaming, which is still YA-ish, right? Like it's being marketed as YA-ish, but like is specifically about um early 20s in New York, and like that is not quite, it's very very cusp YA if that at all. And I think that you'd find that folks who grew up reading This One Summer, or Super Mutant Magic Academy, or uh, Laura Dean's Breaking Up with Me. Like this group of folks is going to immediately go buy Tamaki's. Like if imagine if Raina Telgemeier did like a adult comic.
Sure. Right,
Like
right, like yeah, like she graduates SVA,
right.
and what and her the next 5 years of her life is her next series of books that she's going to do. That would be very interesting. Like what would the response be from the mark? Like I get it. There's always going to be 14-year-old
Yeah,
boys, so you're always going to keep printing Spider-Man
exactly.
because they're going to want to keep reading that. I
Mm-hmm.
get that, but it feels to me. I mean, listen, there are smarter people out there in the world than you and I get this, and they
How
probably
dare
have
you?
I know. They have spreadsheets, and these spreadsheets say
Yeah,
like, well, listen,
right.
the historically reading drops off for anybody over the age of 16 years old on an independent
Yeah,
level, and they don't pick up reading again until their late 20s and early 30s.
right.
Okay,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
I I'm gonna I'm making this up, of
No,
course,
I know.
but that could be it. They could just be saying, hey, there's nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we did this, it might be it's a big risk. I
Absolutely.
don't
And
I don't agree, because I think, like, I know that like Hope Larson is
yeah.
making like her books are aging. Like
Yes.
she's her subject matter is getting more there, and I think she has many more younger stories in her because she has a little kid, so she's going to probably kind of create from that point, that world. But Hope's more than capable of writing adult based stuff,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saying like identifying and just like with anything, like you said, we go back to this is a business, and there are risks with it, and the risks are um they're tangible. They're not a guess of, oh, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. Is like the risks are real, and I think that that's probably, or at least I can only assume, one of the biggest factors of why that might be, is that of all the things that an adult can spend their whatever little, their flexible income can be on, is it going to be comics? I don't know. It's a hard
Right.
gamble right now, and I think that that's real.
I went to Barnes and Noble the other weekend, because I like to put up a post of whatever book I complete, just so I
Mm,
can put it up there. And even with audiobooks, I like to put the actual physical book image there. So I went to go grab a couple books and take a couple snapshots. And I was in the science fiction fantasy area, and it was packed. It was
mm.
packed with young to old people grabbing books.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like I kind of like stood back. I started observing like a creepy old guy, and I'm like watching all these people do their thing. And I'm like, oh, this is really fascinating. And then I sort of drifted to the side, and I got into the manga section, and this group of like 5 to 6, friends came over, and they're all like, boom, 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 pointing and da, 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 but they all walked away with nothing.
Mm,
But the people in the book section were walking out with 2 or 3 books.
interesting.
And I was really curious, like, and I don't know if they're doing the sort of the Amazon thing where they're like, okay, that's the thing I'm going to get
Right.
interested in.
Mm,
Now I'm going to get the digital version of it or whatever,
yeah.
whatever. But comics, the investment of time is very narrow, very slim
Yeah.
when it comes to your engagement with them versus a novel. Like a novel is going to, like, you're going to be with this thing for a little, a chunk of time. And so maybe if someone's like, well, if I'm going to spend $17, I'm going to spend $17 on something that's going to give me weeks of entertainment versus an afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point too. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Interesting.
I mean, please buy comics, read comics, because they're awesome. Um, but I mean, you wonder about the economics, and I realized, I don't know what it was, but the publishing industry isn't run by agents. It's not run by people who read. It's not run by the publishers. It's run by shelf space.
Yep.
And you listen, there's so much great stuff out there, but there's no store that can put all those things on the shelf.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even the largest book chain in the world, Barnes and Noble, can't carry everything.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you and I are the smartest people in the world, and we've just and the big four are listening in on this, and they go, by Jove, they're right. We're going to do older graphic novels for, to grow our audience. There's no shelf space for it.
Yeah.
There's no section in Barnes and Noble, let alone an independent bookseller,
Mm-hmm.
to say, here we go. We're going to, we have all these middle grade, all these young adult, and now we are going to do the same number for adult that they don't have it.
Yeah. It's just not there.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it's interesting. I mean, and we are in a very fluid media stage in time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that like a lot of yeah, like webtoons is a great example of people reading and consuming lots and lots of comics, but not necessarily buying them and not necessarily having to keep up shelf space in their own home of where they're keeping it, and it's just on their phone, which is something they carry with them all the time anyway. Or any number of that. I mean, I think I don't know though. There's the media thing is interesting to me because I feel like there's push and pull over time and cycles of like people being interested in the physical media and then shifting back to digital and then going back. Like I had somebody be like, yeah, I'm so sick of all these streaming services. I'm just gonna start buying DVDs again. And I was like, oh my god, I feel like I just got rid of mine, and now I'm like, no.
I I
You know what I mean? But like, also, I'm somebody who
yeah,
was born in the '80s and I collect records. Like that doesn't make any
I
sense,
know.
but I like them.
Right. Like right, exactly. You are not the demographic
No.
for the record in that respect, but I mean, and listen, there's a curse. There's a curse of certain people in the world that we are attracted to physical objects,
Yeah.
and it's really hard to not carry on with that fixation of whatever the thing would be.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think so that, is this going to solve the shelf space or the marketing issue or anything? No, absolutely not. But I think it is
No,
interesting to kind of note and see the ebbs and flows of where that goes and what draws people's attention. Um, you know,
I mean, I mean, I'm like right about here with the streaming services, and I mean, listen, Apple can change their mind any moment, and I lose all the movies I bought from them.
right? Yeah.
Like, I remember, like, I got an email from Google saying, hey, we sold Google domains to GoDaddy or something, and I'm like, wait, you're Google, and you sold off your domain business to another company, and I chose to go with you because I felt I was like centralizing all of my stuff so I could manage
No.
it, and now I have to like go elsewhere. I'm like,
This
I'm
is
going to become my own domain company just so I don't have to deal with them.
this
I'm
is
joking. I
a
don't have to.
legit nightmare. That's terrible. I had no idea.
I know. I don't know. I mean, maybe they changed their mind. Um, so what?
What a fun note.
Yeah. um, I mean, you were talking about making things, the objects, and we were talking about kind of like, just about the obsessive nature of the physical thing.
Mm.
Like, can you track your interest in making objects to and bring it to the point of making comics, in the various forms that you've made them? I mean, like, there are plenty, you have all these cool handmade pieces that you've done that are
Thank
in
you.
your portfolio of work. And but I'm just curious, like, how, like, where did that start? Can you like make that domino stack?
I think so. I mean I can certainly take a stab at it. I think hmm so I guess if I am pushing kind of backwards pretty far. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and my family was really involved in community theater, which you know, do some people are haters of it. I loved it. It was like having another family. I'm a big theater dork. I'm gonna own it. I don't mind at all. But
No shame, no shame.
got really interested in, like, right away. I was on stage for some productions, but I pretty quickly found that my, like, calling, if you want to say that, is like in stage management and behind the scenes and props and set design. So I think from a pretty young age, we're talking like late middle school, early high school, even, I was involved in like thinking about like prop making, thinking about like set painting, thinking about like what does it look like to have something that's a two-dimensional object up close, but then from far away it looks three-dimensional. That was really interesting to me, like, or the difference of like, we're gonna do these certain techniques to make it look as though there's rocks and fields and grass everywhere, but actually that's not what it is. So I think that is like a really strong kind of like core memory of like physical working on stuff. And that I think trickles into like my high school education and like the art class that I had, which was great. And she was really encouraging of um, like different experimentation of mediums. So I distinctly remember I was also, this makes me so cool. So I understand if you're going to be jealous, but a big anime kid. And so like a lot of my early high school portfolio was just copying, the favorite characters I liked from anime. Um,
Right.
and then my art teacher very gently, very kindly, love her, thank you, Mrs. Mateson, um, encouraged me to look at like pop art, encouraged me to look at other mediums. And so I really remember some of the work that became interesting to me was doing actually like comics as embroidery work and doing like stitch work and fibers work, which is also such a physical medium. Um, and then of course that led to SAIC, which SAC is, freaky art school for undergrad. That's where I went. And it was a lot about I was interested in animation, specifically puppet animation. So again, seeing like prop design, seeing set design, seeing the like physicality. I felt really excited to work. We actually worked on film for some of the projects, which was really cool. Not getting to develop it ourselves, but being able to like shoot on film and have setups and do all the lighting and stuff. And then I took a class that really shifted the trajectory of my making. And so for a long time, it was like theater was what I wanted to do, and then animation was what I wanted to do. And I took this class that was a combination like fibers and screen printing class and then comics class. And so it was taking comics vocabulary and tools and creating like installation or fabric work. So thinking about like
Hmm.
narrative textiles or quilting or 3D work, like soft sculpture. And that like blew the roof off of my brain, and I was like, whoa, printing comics, this is it. And I really fell in love with printmaking. I fell in love with like making artist books. And so that, like, the tactile component of that, of like knowing paper, understanding how like different print processes work, and there's digital involved in that, but was very much like about the physical thing that you get at the end, and
Yeah.
that being intrinsically related to how somebody interacts with the thing. Because I don't love reading things digitally. Just personally, like my own interest, I really like an
Yeah.
audiobook. I feel like digital read is fine, but if I have my preference, I want like a physical book. And that just kind of, I feel like that kind of takes us to where I'm at right now. And that
Okay.
continued in grad school, that continues now. I worked When I was at grad school, I worked at the Dartmouth book and paper like their library section. So I was like rehousing library books and working with like artist books and studying under a conservator, which was really cool. And so like really learning a lot of quote unquote proper technique and not just like artist technique, which I have of course forgotten since then. Sorry, Deborah. But I think that stuff is still really fascinating. And yeah, so still really invested in like printmaking, really invested in all of that. And that has such strong ties to comics and the history of comics.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think that's. I mean, yeah. I mean, printmaking is just the low end production scale of printing.
Yeah.
It's all the same. It's just
Yep.
however, the execution. Um, I love the idea of working with some conservation. I think that's fascinating.
It was so cool. I got to like
Yeah.
handle like 14th century like books, like repair like sheepskin leather, and
Wow.
like we washed these newspapers, which I didn't know was even possible. That was like really crazy, and I was like, this is going to disintegrate, and it didn't. It was really
Wow.
such a cool. I feel so lucky to have done that position. I mean, I love teaching, but like honestly, like I think maybe that was my favorite job I've ever had, is like working in this like not even dungeon, but like this book, I don't know, this like book
Yeah.
hospital. It was so cool. It was so cool all the time, every day.
I love that term, book hospital. I'm writing that down. Um, yeah, I mean, when I got into graphic design, I grew up. So I grew up. My father was an engineer, and I grew up in a workshop.
Mhm.
So anytime I said like, "Oh, this is cool," or "I really would like," I'd like that, and you go, "All right, well, let's figure out how to make it." And we would go
Cool.
and we would figure out how to make something. So I was a big nerdy little kid, and I was like, "Oh, I love Star Trek. I want to have a tricorder." And so we like went to like Radio Shack and we bought all these electronic pieces and we made. I mean, it wasn't that, but it was enough for an 8-year-old kid to go, "Look, guy pushes this button and it makes a noise and a light comes on." And it
That's
was
so
like,
cool.
but that was my whole life growing up, and so
Mm.
like making things is kind of part and parcel of what I do. And I had this so I'm like, okay, well, I need to make a portfolio, like a book for my design, to go get a gig. So I need to
Mhm.
be able to have this thing. So I designed this thing out because, of course, nothing met my standards of what I wanted it to be out there in the real world, which was stupid because they were just fine. But I ended up like figuring out how to do bookbinding just because I'm
Mm.
like, this is what I want. And so there was this phenomenal bookbinding supply company called Talus
Hell
in New
yeah,
York City.
Talus. What's up?
Right.
I
So,
love Talus.
yeah. And I went, and I lived in Manhattan, so I went down there, and their old place was beautiful. I mean, it was this
Uh,
loft. You'd walk up, and it was just, what is this? It was this gorgeous, huge loft space full of rows of all their magic,
wow.
and and so I'm like, getting bored, and I'm learning how to like, wrap things and do all this stuff, and it was great. Like it was just the best. I'm like, and it was one of those things, and I don't do it anymore. I have most of the supplies still. Um, Look, right here. Okay.
Yay.
And like it's just like, but it was like one of those things. Like it's that making thing where you're like, well,
Mm,
make your tools, you know, customize your tools, do the thing to make the thing that you want. So that totally ties in. Like, like I can so understand why, like you go, okay, cool. I'm gonna print onto this fabric, and I'm gonna sew this together and bind it and make a
yeah.
make a one-off, story right here.
Hmm. Yeah, it was a big. It's also interesting too, because now that I have so in my basement I have with my collaborator and I co-own a building, and we have a shared basement space, and that space is part of our shared studio. And so for him, he does a lot more of like woodworking stuff, and then but we also work on print and comics together. So we have now like a print studio space in our basement, which allows us to really like get in the weeds and get nitty gritty with stuff. So we had a copier that I found on eBay for like $400.
Nice.
And he has since died, but
Oh,
we just got a new one who's like very very fancy and brand new. But as much as RIP Fast Eddie, he taught me so much about like how it's working, what's not working, like the different like limits of what I could do. And then we got this new copier, we got a Riso, we have a guillotine, we have a perfect binder, like we have screen printing facilities. It's like it's a whole, we have like a, you know, plotter, like those Cricut plotter cutter guys. But it's really fascinating. And so that like the ability to find a thing and have it make what you want it to make is so necessary to me. And it's, I can't tell you how hard it was to like let go of some of those instincts working with a publisher to be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
really was an unexpected difficulty for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, let's talk like what were like what was what was your instinct, and then what did you have to sort of like go talk to yourself and say, okay, I can't, like I have to talk myself off the ledge here. Like what is it?
Well, one of the big, so I don't want to say that you know that there aren't things that they contributed that were great. They were fantastic. And in fact, it was more of like the immediate gratification to be like, I made a thing, here it is. I like had to,
Ta-da!
yeah, I had to like submit the files, and like, you know, we
Right.
checked everything, and like I didn't get to physically hold like proofs or anything, and that was so
Right.
hard for me, you
So
know.
you're trusting somebody else like Kayla
Yep.
to, you know,
Who
to
literally,
manage your
it was Kayla was the designer
okay,
on my book.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're trusting Kayla to manage your, you know, the actual production flow of your book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
I get that. Yeah.
Kayla and Paul, and they did a fantastic job, but it's so hard to you know, and there's also lots of things that I didn't know, right? Like there's some aspects of like for the book, the cover has an emboss on it, and so some the figures on the cover and the meat and then the title are embossed, and so that obviously needs a separate file so that the printer knows that like these elements need to stick up. And so like what is the specs of that kind of file that need to be submitted? Or, you know, I didn't know, like Kayla and I talked about it, and I was like, I like this book, I like this book, I like this book, and like talked about different comps or textures. But at the end of the day, when the advanced copy arrived, I was like, finally. But it was so long to have to wait and to only see
Right.
virtual proofs, and like feeling just like anxious because obviously like I'm not printing it. It was just a whole other realm of being like, wow, I have to let go. Like I have to trust other people. I have to, you know, be reassured like they do this all the time,
Right.
all
It's their
day.
job.
This is the thing,
Right.
like, you know, it's fine. And so that was just, it was more like emotionally hard just because I'm so used to DIY and self-publishing thing.
Do you think this is what homeschool parents feel like when their kids go off to college?
It must be, you know, or if not worse.
Somebody's teaching my child something.
I feel so bad at every email is like sorry like 10,000 times. Be like, I'm really sorry I'm asking you. I just really, you know, I want to make sure everything's perfect. This is my baby. Right? Like
Right. Yeah. No, I get the instinct. I mean, you know, listen, I work with a lot of clients, and you know,
yeah.
there's a lot of, you know, there's a range, and there's, and I find the you know the job of the designer, art director, whatever your title is to be an educator, is to
Mhm.
educate you know, your client as much as possible, because it's the panicked email, phone call, text messages of that will happen if they don't know what is going to happen or what to expect.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so one of the things that I did too, just like for my own, like to calm myself down because I have this production facility in my basement, is I made mock-ups of like, you know, print
Nice.
files, and was like, okay, this is what I'm thinking, like here's the size it's going to be at, like all of this stuff, just to like, you know, help me understand, because obviously, you know, I asked for proofs, but it makes sense as to why, you know, they couldn't send them both to Seattle and to North Carolina. And so it's like, and then also Chicago. So it's like that makes sense logistically. There's reasons for all of this. Plus, again, you know, they do this all the time, but it was helpful for me. So even going back to my instincts of making a thing, is I was like, well, I need to print it out and make it just to check.
As a therapeutic
Yes.
exercise.
Yeah, it was more of a way to try to be like, you don't need to email them again. Just print it out and look at it. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
Which makes me sound incredibly unhinged, but like that's just who I
Well,
am.
but it's like, I mean, for everyone who is listening who's made comic book, they know the volume of work that goes into it.
Yeah.
And so there's no, like, there's an understanding of like, there is such an investment that happens in this process. If you haven't, it is overwhelming, the amount of things you have to do. And
Mhm.
to, if you are the person who's doing it yourself, and then you say someone else is doing it, I get it. I get the
Yeah.
fear factor.
Yeah, and it's it's my first book with a publisher. It's and at the end of the day, they everybody who's invested in the work, I know is invested in the work, and also no matter who they are, they will never be as invested as I am. Like it doesn't
Right.
matter. You could be 100, you could be 200% invested, but like it's just different. It's a different
Yeah.
scale, a different barometer, and like my attachment or control or care, whatever, however you want to frame it, is just it's something that is very, very, very important to me.
Yeah. So on a strategic scale,
I love these strategy questions.
thanks. How does Tender fit? Tender is the name of the graphic novel, just so because
Oh, right.
I'm an expert when it comes to promoting things in the middle of the podcast. Not at the beginning, apparently. Um, so, like, how strategic is Tender for you, or was it something you had to say, like, okay, now how do I make this a strategic move, or
Mm.
I'm not, I'm just making a comic?
So there's a couple of things. I don't know if I have like a quick, easy answer for that. So forgive me as I word vomit my solution. um, One of the big things was the project that I did before Tender was Half Asleep, which is a 360-page graphic novel with my collaborator, Kyle. And we self published that. We put it out in a single issue at a time, and we started working on it. Well, the first volume came out, I believe, in 2013. Um, and so he had started writing before that, obviously, but we finished it, or we knew we were going to be finishing it in 2018. And that was a pretty good clip. Like I feel good about it. I'm really happy with that project. But that project, towards the end of that project, we started talking about, okay, what's next, right? We can see the ending, we know where we're going. And I felt pretty adamant that the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to do a solo project. I didn't know what I wanted it to be, but I knew that I was like, okay, I did a solo project for my thesis. We did a collaboration called Cycles kind of right away when I was out of grad school. And then he and I immediately started working on Half Asleep. And then that was, 5 years later, we wake up from we emerge from the cocoon of comics, right? And I knew I wanted to do solo work. I knew that that was going to be positive on my like faculty, kind of like moving that up the ladder. And so that was our agreement. So that strategy of like next thing's a solo thing, cool. And he's like, great, sounds good. Um, and so I started with like the loose ideas and development for Tender like kind of right away in 2018. And then as the book started to take shape, I think I finished the thumbnails in 2019, I think.
Okay.
And then started penciling like end of 2019, early 2020. Um, and then finished pencils, it was another year or so. So as the pencils were developing and I was feeling more confident about the book and feeling like, oh, okay, this is a thing, that the whole journey of that was going to be, I'm just going to make this thing. I'm going to self-publish it. That's my interest. As the book started to take more shape and become more clear, I realized I wanted it to be in color. So that determined a couple of things. Is that number one, I was going to draw it digitally, which was brand new. This is the first book I've ever done completely digital. Um, Number two, I wanted to do it digitally because almost all of my students are working digitally, and I can't be
Mm.
that guy who doesn't know how to help them. So the best way to learn is to do a thing.
Yep. Totally.
So that was also kind of a strategic choice, both for the content of the book and for like my own ability to maintain and continue to be in a mentor role for students. And then Field Mouse Press put out an open call for submissions. Do you know that publishing?
I've heard the name.
They're a
I don't. I'm
small
not.
they're a smaller pub. They're really kicking off now. They're some of the guys who do Soul Rad are the publishers. The two that I know personally are Alexander Hoffman and Rob Clow, who does High Low Comics.
Okay.
But so I've known Rob for a long time, had not known Alex, but they put out an open call for graphic novels. And around the same time, I had my most recent like move up in the faculty ladder and was able to show some of the work from Tender. And then that got that feedback that like you like the biggest thing that's missing is you don't have a book with a publisher. And I was like, okay, so this seems like a good fit. I like these guys, I trust them, it's an open call, they're a small pub, but it seems like a good fit. So I submitted it. They were really excited about it. At the same time, I was talking to a friend and they said, well, if you're looking at actually publishing it, who's your dream publisher? And I was like, well, my dream publisher is Fantagraphics. And I said, and not just because I love them, but because I think this book actually would fit really nicely in their catalog. I think it has relationship with Katie Skelly's work and Ezra Clayton Daniels' work, the two who ended up doing blurbs on the back, which makes me feel kind of swoony. And so they were like, well, Gary and Eric, why don't you just email them? And to time jump back a little bit, Gary at Emerald City Comic Con one year came up to my table, and I didn't know who he was at the time, and picked up the single issues of Half Asleep and was like, wow, this cover design is incredible. And he like
Mm.
introduced himself and we just started chatting for a while, and he's like, can you send these to me after the show? And I was like, sure, I'd be delighted. And of course my eyes lit up and I was so excited, and I texted Kyle right away like, oh my god. So Gary and I since then had just kind of a casual back and forth at shows. I would go say hi, I would show him the new stuff. He talked a little bit about Half Asleep, but that ultimately didn't end up going anywhere. And so I was like, well, I do have the contact for these folks. Maybe I'll just email and ask like, hey, I'm working on a new thing. Would you be interested in seeing it? And so this is happening kind of simultaneously. And they were interested and Field Mouse was interested, and so it kind of became like a back and forth to see which would be the right fit, who did I want to work with. And so that, at the end of the day, the offer ended up being from Fanta, and they're my kind of my dream publisher. I talked with Field Mouse about why I did what I did, and we're on great terms still. Those guys are so sweet. And I would love to work with them in the future too, if you're listening, Rob and Alex. But that's kind of why it ended up being where it is. So it started as like strategic move for I needed a solo thing, then strategic move for it's going to be in color and I need to learn how to use digital, and then the promotion feedback of you should have a published thing, and I was like, okay, well, let's give this a shot. So,
Wow.
but also none of that had anything to do with what the story was or
The story is like
yeah,
completely independent of all
yes,
of these sort of choices and
yes.
actions.
And
Huh.
if Field Mouse and Fanta were like, yeah, this is cool, but like, nah, dog, I was like, I'm ready to do this myself, and I have no problem with that. Because I got to a place where I'm like, this book is something I really care about. I think it's awesome. I'm so excited to put this together, and well, cherry on top is somebody else put it together, which is great.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though it was a terrifying process.
Even though I was scared out of my mind.
Yeah, I get it. Well, the story is, I guess it's a challenging story. I think if you're
Yeah.
talking in a spectrum of just for readers, like oh, a comic,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
challenging.
For sure.
I think if it's people who are, buyers of, Fantagraphics books and, cruising the independent comic lanes at conventions, not so much. Like
Yeah.
they're going to go, oh, okay, like this is a personal work of, I'm going to check this out. So, but like you have interesting themes running through the story. And one of them I thought like you were really focused on is the sort of the that existential pressure of social media
Mhm.
and how that can feed the negative aspects of our personalities.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a huge I think that's a huge part of my coming of age when I have is like being born in 86. Like I remember being in school before we had computers that did much. I had to take keyboarding classes, like, and then getting my first iPhone when I was like in my 20s, and like seeing how that has evolved till now, and then especially like I remember how big of a deal it was to be like, oh my god, SAIC's on Facebook, I can finally join Facebook. And like I remember that, and like all of the great embarrassing AOL instant messenger names I had, and the fear of like being in a chat room, oh my god, right? Like I remember all of that really vividly. And then now being in my 30s and thinking about how I stay in touch with people, how I connect with people is like folks who I'm not immediately around, is
Right.
through social media. And that's not uncommon, but it's also, as somebody, there's the uptick of like mommy bloggers, there's the uptick of like being a perfect artisan and crafter, there's also the like live streams, there's and this I think expands not just to like being a woman or domesticity. I think it expands in a lot of different ways, but in particular, there is a subsect that is very specifically targeted to like female identified people, of like makeup tutorials, like clothing brands, being an MLM seller, like all of this stuff that has happened, and like seeing it and witnessing it and being, maybe subjected to it or also
Sure.
participating in it. Like this
Yeah, yeah.
this was a huge this is a huge cultural shift, I think. And that's really powerful to witness and see.
Yeah, it's huge. The I think about like I'm thinking about your creation and your creations in the terms of a communication that you know we make things because we have this thing inside us. I gotta make this thing. I gotta
Mhm.
make write this thing. I gotta draw this thing. Whatever the thing is, you make it. And predominantly we're not going like, and everybody's got to see this and like it and love it. Like that's not
Mhm.
really where our mind is. We have to sort of execute whatever this sort of intention is with us. And it's real tough because there's this, like I said, we give ourselves a moment of a pat on the back and then we move on. But I think like there's this weird sort of like, well, I got to put it out there. And then you put it out there like in the social media aspect. And what is the thing that's going to make you happy in doing that? Like, because I
Right.
don't I don't think I think it's you can never gain on it, because even if like you put a post up and it gets more hits than you've ever had before, well then you're judging the follow-up post on that post that
Yeah.
was the big hit. And so it's a law of diminishing returns.
Right. And I think too, the facade of polish or success,
Mm,
or so much of that, I think we're becoming more aware of it, but like remembering how big of a deal it was to realize that like Martha Stewart Living, right? Like that's all staged by people. There's professionals who do this, or like these photos are drastically adjusted, and like under trying to realize and understand that veneer, and like figuring out that then now on social media that same thing happens, and the reality of the judgment that you have of being like, wow, this person got, they went viral, they have 2 million likes on this thing, and like I only got 10, like that's, I feel terrible. And it's like, dude, this is A, probably that person's job, and B, they probably have a team of people doing this. Like there's ghostwriters, there's professional photographers, there's all this stuff, but
They're
somehow we're still,
they're paying for likes.
yes. And
You know, there's a
yeah, or
whole
there's
there's
bots just farming it, right? Like,
yes.
and we
Yeah.
still, though, there's a part of our brains, I think, is that we're still feeling like I'm not doing enough. It's not enough. I'm not there. Like and there's something really, really palpable and really sad and really painful about it too.
Beth, it's so tough. I mean, like I've been doing this for 4 years, and I love having engaged conversations. But then, like, weakness will creep in and go, well, why is not everybody listening to this?
Yeah.
And I get it. Listen, it's niche. It's a niche of a niche. Like, if you're not into comics, you're not going to be looking for this.
Right.
And then, creators, I think, predominantly listen to this because, like, hey, I understand, like, we're talking shop talk, and that may
Right.
not be
Right.
interesting for someone who is just an enjoyer of comic books, unless they're like, oh, I love Beth and I love her work, so I want to hear her talk. That's
Right.
understandable. But that's only one segment of the, the recording, that I'm
Hmm.
offering. And then I go, I'm also, artists say like, oh yeah, I listen to your show while I'm drawing. I'm like, okay, well, as I write, I don't listen to anything with words in it. So I know that every single writer who could be a listener isn't listening
Right.
because
Right.
they can't.
Yeah.
So I go, okay, so I can't judge myself against what a curve might be for someone who is throwing up all the most popular comic book things and slamming the things that everyone else is slamming. Cool. Nice.
Yeah. And then expand that to like how you raise your children, expand that to how you present and how you look. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
so many subsections and intersections of what that is, and like the character in my book is so tied into this idea that she needs to be that, and she needs to
Yeah.
look like that, and she needs to have these things, because otherwise she's worthless. And I
Right.
think that that's as sad and as dark and as twisted as the story gets, like at its center, I think that that's not a it's not a individual or isolated issue or isolated thought that no one, like there's not zero people who've had that thought,
Of course. I
right?
mean, it is. I mean, it permeates most everybody's day in some fashion,
Mhm.
and and everybody struggles it with one way. I mean, I remember I got off of Facebook maybe like 10 years ago
Mm.
because I couldn't stand the fakery of Facebook. I couldn't stand the fact that the people who I knew and I'd known for decades, that what they were putting up there wasn't what their life was. And I'm like, couldn't I couldn't square that circle. Like it just
Mm.
really, really kind of made me confused and unhappy. And instead of like posting stacks of bills, and stuff that needed to be fixed or cleaned up in my house and in my life, I got off. Like I'm like that. My solution was to not sort of like
Yeah.
burn the ship and and go fuck you. Um, I just stepped away. Um, but it's a really, really hard thing because the tools that we are freely using uh, are a giant sociological experiment for profit, and
Yeah.
it's a real tough
Yeah.
thing that we are caught in the in the crosshairs of that.
Yeah, and I think also too, there are different levels of awareness people have, and myself included. I'm not exempt from this by
Oh,
any
yeah,
means,
yeah.
of like awareness of like how and who and when the strings are being pulled, and especially in what am I noticing, what am I seeing, like how am I interacting on this platform, and who's documenting it, and then what am I seeing because of that, like all of that stuff is factored in, and a part of it, and becomes like something that is like this rat king of like it's just all tangled and messy and biting everything. It's horrible.
Yeah. Where did the meat theme come in for you? Was that an early thing or was that a later thing? Like how did like because like I mean I get the metaphor that you're applying,
Mm.
throughout the story, but I'm wondering like where that came in as the story developed.
Yeah. I think about, I don't know. I've there's one of the like inspirations for the book is no shock to anyone, I think, will be Rosemary's Baby. And
Mm.
there's a really pivotal scene when she is like early in her pregnancy and she's craving meat and craving like red meat, and she kind of like sears a steak very quickly and then eats it very bloody. And then there's another moment where she eats like a raw like liver, like an uncooked liver piece, and like catches herself being like horrified by herself. I think that the meat kind of came in tied to like the strange cravings that pregnancy can, you know, create in people. But then I also wanted this like hint at like ordering a steak is quote unquote not ladylike. There's something about the like perception of a woman who enjoys meat as being this like idea that that's not proper, or there's something where you're like, oh, that's notable for some fucked up reason, that's notable. And I think that that really bristles me in general. And so I wanted right away, like the very first things you see her eat are, she goes from these like microwave dinners at home to this like meat sandwich, and then
The
she,
double stack sandwich.
yeah, and then her friend says something about it, and her friend is always eating a salad. Even at, there's like a brunch scene with her and her friends, and like she orders a steak, and every single other person has a salad at the table. And I think that there's this piece of it that makes me feel like I wanted her to stand out as different from the get-go, despite her desire to fit in. And that felt like a really interesting way to play with it. And then obviously the meat and like hunger for that, there's like, yeah, there's some, the metaphor that's being pulled with some of that is I think the idea of like what's good for you, what's not good for you, like the way you're supposed to, your body is being supported or controlled, or like your nutrients, things like that is folded in.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because you have these two sort of elements in the story that are kind of drawing upon like our base urges and needs. So you have this
Hmm.
social sort of acceptancy element, and then you have this food, this meat, this survival
Yeah.
thing, and it's almost showing that she can't control either of those things.
Yeah.
So like she can't like not post this framed image to show off something like, hey, it's the most value, the biggest day in your life,
Hmm.
and you got to stop the moment and and take a picture,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you're out with the ladies, and this is the right social engagement, but you're eating a steak, like these are like, and it's not saying that eating a steak is wrong,
No. Yeah.
except for the cow. It's but it's the fact that she can't just go like, I'm going to play along with that, like
Yeah.
she is, her base desires and needs, or wants, these are more wants than needs, I think,
Yeah.
are
Wants.
are, are kind of coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that I think is really important because I wanted it to be clear in the story that even if um even if you maybe don't notice it right away, but she is off from the beginning. And the timeline, is not linear. It jumps around in time a little bit, but if you follow it in a linear fashion, before she meets Lee, before any of the stuff with her family, like any of that, something's not okay. And I needed that to be prevalent from the get-go because I did not want it to seem like she had this horrible luck and this horrible stuff and then she went and snapped, and like
Right.
these are all factors, but it's compounded, and it's not just one thing, it's multiple things that are escalating to get her to this point.
Yeah, I mean it's the obsessive compulsive behavior that comes out like in the picking aspect,
Yeah.
like all these little kind of things, and those things are uncontrollable, but they are, they're the harbingers of potential problems.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and another thing that's like, considered poor etiquette of like picking at your nails or biting them, or
Hmm.
having unmanicured nails, even like all of this stuff that's tied to behavior, that's tied to traditional or um societal expectations for femininity or domesticity, and the fact that we're always performing roles in different ways. And for Carol Ann, that is something where the dial is turned up way beyond 11 for her.
Hmm. Yeah, like quitting your job, and
Yeah,
becoming a Susie homemaker in that respect. Like there was
yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, you've really tackled a lot of subjects and in themes in the story. So
Thank you. Yeah.
good. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, well, it's hard to say I enjoyed it, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah, that seems to, for folks who have read it, that seems to be kind of a similar thing, is they're like, yeah, it's great, but like, it's not great, but like I
Right,
liked it,
right.
but I didn't.
It's really, really well done.
Thank you. I really,
Like a
that means a
steak.
lot. Yes, yes. That's the pull quote right there. That's perfect.
So, when does it come out? Do the spiel. If you
You
got if
bet.
you have a spiel-ish, spiel away.
Yeah, so Tender comes out on March 12th, 2024, very soon. You can get it wherever you get books. If you order through Fantagraphics directly and you're within the first 150 orders, you'll get a custom book plate by yours truly. There is It's a psychological thriller with body horror elements about this woman Carol Ann who wants to control and is so hungry for a picture perfect life. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast and you got to this point, you maybe have picked out some of those ideas, but I do want to make sure that I'm appropriately identifying that this is horror. Please check content warnings if you find that that's helpful for you. There are plenty of them that you should know about if you would like, but I'm not going to give them unless folks want them. So
Yeah,
um,
that's fair.
and yeah, but also you can find more information on the Fantagraphics site. You can find out stuff about me. My socials are at Beth Hetland, one word, so Hetland. And then my website is just beth-hetland.com. You can find out about books that are not horror on that website as well.
There you go. I will make sure that all the stuff is in the description so people can
Wonderful.
click on stuff if they're in there. Yeah, it's congratulations. I
Thank
think
you.
that's I mean, it's no small feat when you make a thing and it gets out there in the world.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very, very excited. As twisted as it is, I'm still very proud of my dark twisted little
You should be. You
bundle.
should be. Yeah, yeah. No, you absolutely should be. Are you going to be doing any shows this year for people who meet
Yeah.
up?
Yeah, I'm doing a ton of shows. I feel like probably I need to get just like a concise list on my website, but I think one of the big ones, and especially if are you still in the New York area?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I left years and years ago.
Okay, okay. Well, for East Coast stuff, that first weekend after the book debut, so that'll be March 16th and 17th, I will be tabling at Mocha in New
Oh,
York.
cool.
I'm also doing a bunch of different events, doing like kind of mini tour pockets in between teaching my classes this year. But I'll be doing for sure Mocha and TCAF, Detroit Zine Fest. Uh, and I think and there's a one that's like right early that's really really niche that I'm excited about called the Scare Lastic Book Fair. That's
Ooh.
an all horror themed book fair for prose and for comics, and so that's going to be
Oh,
in
right on.
Indianapolis like March 2nd, I think. So those are kind of the ones that are like big and confirmed right now, so but
Right on.
more to
Well, that's
come.
great. I maybe get you to Heroes. You can sit with Kayla, and you can sit with
Yes,
Noah Van Sciver. You guys can have all
amazing.
sorts of indie talk.
Oh, that would be great. I've heard great things about that show actually from a bunch of different folks.
It's great for everyone in the terms, like if you're indie or if you're mainstream, like it's just a love fest of great creators. So
So cool.
um yeah, maybe reach out to them and see if
Yeah,
they have some space for you.
that would be ideal.
Thank you for the advanced reading copy because it was
Of
really
course.
quite, yeah, it was great to read. And I guess shout out to our mutual friend for the hookup, and
Thanks.
glad we made the connection.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tyrell. And thank you so much for having me on this. I had such a treat talking with you.
Thanks. No, this is an absolute pleasure. Kick butt this year and make some great people smarter in your classes.
I'm gonna gosh darn try. I'll tell you that.
Right on. Thank you so much.
Thanks.